What's going on, everybody? Johnny Ben here at Trepa Technologies. In today's video, we're going to be going over JSON. So it's going to be part of our network automation course where we now are diving into data serialization, specifically JSON. And that is because in the CCNA exam, they only want you to interpret JSON. So there is other data serialization out there like XML and YAML. We're not going to dive into those. Those are going to be definitely bonus videos that we create after the full course is done, which we only have a few more videos. But today we're just going to go over JavaScript object notation. So with that being said, let's go ahead and get started. All right, so we're going to start going over JSON. And on today's agenda, we're just going to talk about what data serialization is, why we need it. Essentially what we're saying is when there's two different languages, let's just say, for example, Python and PHP. Really weird example. Or let's just say your SQL database has to talk to the front end and it has to offer up data and it's structured query language, right? Well, maybe that front end language can't understand that. So then we have a data serialization language like JSON that they can both understand. That is going to be the point of JSON entirely. Just a standardized language or format that all different types of apps and programs can understand. So we're going to go over an overview of that. And then we're going to jump right into interpreting JSON. So how do we look at a JSON object? How do we determine the key value pairs? What are strings, booleans, numbers? What are variables? And then what are arrays? And during this, I'll probably bring up a terminal, then get into like a Python terminal and actually go over variables in real time. And we'll probably also bring up VS Code and look at a couple of JSON objects that I had ChatGPT create, and we'll go through and dissect them. Essentially say, okay, what is the value when the key is R1 or something like that, right? Something that you may see on the exam. And again, we don't know what's on the exam, but if they're asking you on the CCNA exam objectives to interpret JSON, more than likely they're going to be asking you, okay, what is this object? What are the key and value pairs in it? So let's go ahead and jump right into it. So data serialization. So structured data. In network automation, you often work with structured data that represents configurations, commands, or status information of network devices. Kind of like what we're seeing right here. Oh, sorry, bring my pen out. Kind of like what we see right here. This data can be in the form of dictionaries like JSON, YAML, or XML, or other similar data structures. So because of that, this gives us a standardized way to share information. So data serialization languages allow us to represent variables within text. Some other key things about data serialization is that it does data exchange. So when automating network tasks, you may need to send commands, configuration changes, or receive status updates from network devices. Serialization ensures that the data you send or receive is in a format that both your automation scripts and the network devices can understand and process. So again, just a common language for when we're configuring or when we're gathering data that all programs and apps can understand. We can also parse and do deserialization. So on the receiving end, the serialized data needs to be deserialized back into the structured format that your automation scripts can work with. This process involves interpreting the serialized data and converting it back into objects or data structures that can be manipulated. And what we mean by that, if we take a look at our diagram down here, let me bring up my black pen. So if we look at this diagram, we have this app. And let's say this app is trying to talk, or this REST API client needs to do a GET request over to this controller. And let's say this controller speaks, it holds data in a different language than this app. Without this JSON formatted variables, when it would send that information that the app is requesting back, it wouldn't know what to do with it. It'd be like, this is unreadable to me because we don't have that standard data serialization. So with JSON, the beauty of it, this API here, when we do our GET request, we're going to do that GET request, and this would be like an HTTP GET request. You know, there's a REST API, which we're going to talk about in the next video. This API would receive that and say, okay, you're looking for these internal variables. Maybe you're looking for the CPU utilization of R1, because if this is a controller, you got to imagine this is like a DNA center that has hundreds of routers. It's then going to send it back in JSON format. So then this API is going to convert the internal variable into JSON, send it back, and then this REST API client is going to parse through that JSON data and convert it back into its native format or native language, whatever that may be. But because both the controller API and this REST API client understand JSON, they can both still talk to each other. Okay, so now let's just dive into what JSON is. So JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. Even though it's based off JavaScript, it's used in every language, right? Well, in most programming languages and apps. It's lightweight and human readable data interchange format. And what we mean by that, human readable, is that these dictionaries over here to the right in my example of JSON are kind of easy to read. Even if you're not a programmer, you don't know how to code, you can kind of tell what this is saying. Saying, okay, the IP address is this. You can kind of tell without knowing what variables are, key value pairs, or dictionaries are. You can kind of understand that, right? It puts it in a human readable format. It is widely used in network automation and many other domains for its simplicity and versatility. And then JSON is often used to represent and exchange structured data between different systems, making it an ideal choice for network automation purposes. Especially for network automation, because you know when we run show commands, those just look like columns and rows of information. There's really no structure to it. It kind of almost looks like an Excel spreadsheet put on your CLI, right? So that's what JSON provides for us. So you can see here, this is information about a networking device in JSON format. Now you can see here that it looks like there's nice spacing and indentation here. And you can see that because I took this screen clip from my Visual Studio Code. However, JSON doesn't care about white space. This is just formatted in a pretty way, but this could all just be on like a single line or two lines, okay? So JSON does not care about indentation or white space. Now, when we're talking like YAML, that's going to matter, the white space and indentation. But again, CCNA exam objectives, we don't need to get into YAML in depth, so we're not going to. Now, let's go over the structures in JSON. And this is kind of going to go into a lot of basics of programming and scripting and really just computer science. So first, JSON structure is structured in dictionaries. These dictionaries have what are called key value pairs. The key being the variable and the value being what equals that variable. And that value can be a string, a number, or a boolean, or a null. Okay? Another key thing about keys, no pun intended, is that they are always strings. So the keys and the key value pairs are always strings, but the values can be strings, numbers or integers, boolean values, or null. So as you can see here, I actually have that in the list. And then JSON objects. JSON objects are going to be enclosed with these curly braces. And again, those objects have key value pairs in them that are separated by a comma. And then JSON arrays, they are ordered list of values enclosed in square brackets. So let's go ahead and break this down. So what I'm going to do right now, guys, is bring up a terminal, and we're going to go in real time on like CLI or like on a keyboard, explain what variables are. We're going to explain what numbers are. We're going to show you what a list is or an array, because they're very similar. And then we're going to show you Boolean. So let's go ahead and bring up our terminal. So I'm on a MacBook. So 1 second here. So I'm on a MacBook. So we're going to bring up our terminal. And as you can see here, let's clear that off. We're going to just zoom in just a little bit. And then we're going to get into our Python terminal or interpreter. Oops, that is not it. It's just Python. Okay, so here we're at our Python terminal or interpreter. And the first one we're going to go over is a variable. So a variable is just a container for a value that then we can use within our program or our applications. So let's check that out. So if I type in here new variable equals, and I give it a string. Remember, this is a string when it's in quotes. We'll say new variable equals my name. Then if we look at this variable, which is a container for that value, that string value now, because we said that it equals, we do print new variable. There we go. Now what if I want to make this variable a number? I can do that. And now it's a number. Now what's the main difference between this number and this string? Well, obviously we see that the string is in these quotes. But let's say I take num1 and I equal that to 40. I take num2 and I equal that to 40. And then I do print num1 plus, actually, let's do this. We'll do num3 equals num1 plus num2. And then we do print num3. So you see that? So this interpreted it as a string. Why is that? Because it's in the quotations. Now if we did num3 equals num1 plus num2, and then we did print num3, it gives us the actual number. So let's just backtrack a little bit, right? Let's go over that. So what we're showing you here is the difference between the strings and the numbers. Strings are always in those quotations. So we set two variables here. And we set those variables to equal an integer or number. And then I wanted to make a new variable that's the sum of num1 and num2. So I type in num3 equals num1 plus num2, but I put it in quotation marks. So then when I go to print the num3 variable, what do I get? That actual string, okay? That's a key difference between the strings and the numbers. Then when I remove those quotes and I do num3 equals num1 plus num2, it actually fed me the sum of what these variables equal. Because remember, num1 equals 40 and num2 equals 40. So now num3 holds an integer value of 80. Okay, now let's move on to something else. Now, let's go over what a Boolean value is. So a Boolean value is either true or false. So imagine if we're getting some information from like a Cisco switch and one of our keys is up. And we do colon, and if we put true there, that's a Boolean value in logic for, yes, that is true. It is up. And you notice there's no quotations, because that would mean now it's a string instead of a Boolean value, which does not have those quotations. Okay, so now let's make a new variable and give it a Boolean value. So what we're going to do is up equals true. And look at that. It says name true is not defined. Okay, so what is that telling us? That's telling us that that variable cannot be Boolean logic. So what if I just put an extra one there? Still say is up is not defined. What if I did is equals true? It still says is invalid syntax, okay? So now let's try this. Num4 equals true. It still says it's not defined. And why is that? Because this is a Boolean value. So if we type in this, now let's see what we got. True. And that's a Boolean value. So you may be saying, well, why? Like, why wasn't this working? Because the Boolean values have that capital in it. So if I want to do num4 equals false, it give me an error. But if I do false like this, in Python, those Boolean values are capital, okay? Now, if I type in num4 equals false like this, then I print num4. Now that's a string value, okay? So the Boolean logic is either true or false. All right, now let's get back into the JSON object. So now let's go back into interpreting this object here. So an object is an unordered list of key value pairs. Now let's dissect the key value pairs. So the key is always going to be the first thing in that object, and that's always going to be a string, always. And then we put a colon there, and then after that is the value. That's what that equals. I always look at that. That's essentially a variable, right? We're setting the variable device name or that key, and that value can either be a string, a number, Boolean. It can also be null, which just means nothing. Or it could also be another object or an array. And let's get into that. So that's pretty easy to understand, right? And we can see here for good syntax, in this object, if there's another key value pair, we put a comma, comma, comma. And then we see interface config here. So that is a key. If we can say its value is actually an array. You see that? Because of those brackets there. Arrays are represented by these brackets. And then within that array, we have two objects. And then those nested objects also have their own key value pairs. So this key here, interface underscore config, its value is a what? It's actually an array. And within that array, we have two more dictionaries or two JSON objects that each have 4 key value pairs. And then you see even down here, we see this value, or excuse me, this key right here, because it's in a string, its value is just another JSON object. And then this value within that nested object networks, or this key, its value is a list or another array, okay? So now interpreting JSON. So if we just look at this screen right here, let's go ahead and try to interpret this. So how many objects do we see here? So remember, JSON objects are in the curly brackets. So we only have one JSON object. And then if I asked you, what's the value for the key speed? So the key speed, what is its value? Is it a number or a string? Well, that's going to be a number because it does not have those quotations. So it's a number. And then if I asked you how many key value pairs do we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We have 3 strings as our values. We have 1 Boolean, and notice how in JSON it doesn't have to be a capital T. So probably, I don't know, I might even cut out that whole thing with the Python just because, yeah, JSON doesn't matter. It doesn't have to be capital. But that is a Boolean, and you can tell because, again, there's no quotation, so it's not a string. And then here we have a number. So that's how we interpret JSON. All right, guys, so that's going to be it for this video, interpreting JSON and going over JSON. So in network automation, though, there is more than just JSON. You know, we have XML that we can structure things on. And if you ever do the CCNP exam, you will have to know XML. And then Ansible, a widely used automation language or program or app uses YAML. YAML is not a markup language, what it stands for. It's kind of a joke. The original was called Yet Another Markup Language, and that's going to be in our bonus content. So I want to thank everyone for viewing. And if you're an active duty, reserve, or National Guard soldier, please click that link in the description below to see how you can get free training through the Army Ignited program, which gives you $4,000 a year in credentialing assistance. And if you like this free content, please like and subscribe and share it with your friends.